So, since a lot of you wanted some tutorials, here you go. I've gotten a request for a coloring tutorial, but since I don't feel like I've nailed my colors yet, let's begin with a line art one. I will be making 9 different line arts and telling you exactly how I make them, so you can follow up with whatever line style you'd like to try the most. And I will be using the same trial puppet like in the Horikoshi video. Say hi to Ren! Every brush I'm using will be linked below. I am using the same brush for every single one of them together with a very handy filler tool just to prove a point that brush doesn't matter that much. You just need to know how to use it or find the one that suits you. So I'm starting with my own line art style, and as you might have noticed, I do not sketch. I'd recommend sketching if you are not very comfortable with your art yet, but if you wish to not sketch also, I got you. You will need to have the size of your brush at least half the size of how you want the thickest part of your line art to be, then enhance it afterwards. Otherwise, if you try to do the thick and thin all at once, it might end up a mess like this Michizu drawing I made years ago. Steady hand is very necessary, as well as drawing like you would on paper. No fast straight lines, but slow and thought through. Also, you don't need to follow the base to the T. I don't usually follow it religiously, it's just here to show me the way. Now finally to the line art that I do. As I said, I'm starting with flat even lines. Size of my brush is 8 and I am using these canvas settings. It's standard manga magazine size uncropped. Also, when there is something like an eye behind the hair, I just erase some lines into it. It makes the hair feel like it's more in the way. Once I finish those flat lines, I'm adding, how I call it, black shades. It makes the line art pop very well. I'm adding them especially when there is object behind the head, like hair is, when something gives a very hard shade, like his chin, and on line art I add thickness when 2 lines touch. I make that little round also, and when there is something round, like those mountains on his hair. I also cross-hatch them sometimes, like you can see on his hair and chin a little bit. It makes it blend more. I use brush size 20 on black shades. And at the end, I add tiny lines into his hair to make it a little bit more hairy. The second line art is just a copy of the flat one without the black shades, and I've made his hair black, which it normally is, but for the sake of this tutorial, I will not be coloring his hair black in any other line art. This line art is just for control purposes, being just flat with no other enhancement than his black hair. Off to the third one we go. I also copied the flat line here and decided to enhance them differently. I am just adding some black parts to round him up, as well as different type of hair enhancement, uneven scribbles. For the fourth one, I wanted to get some inspiration of an established manga. I chose Yakusoku no Neverland since the line art is something I found quite interesting. I used a smaller brush size than I normally do, size 5, and struggled a bit before I got a little comfortable. I've made flat lines, but for his eyes I made them kinda scribbly following their shape. I also didn't connect a few lines fully. I usually don't do that, but a lot of mangakas do. Then I thickened the hair from the right side mostly and the roundest parts of the face, cheek and chin. I added a small line to the roundest part of his hair and some straight long lines to enhance his hair. For the fifth one, I wanted to go thick. So I grabbed my flat lines and thickened the roundest parts and especially the sharpest edges, as well as the top of his pupils. But I didn't thicken his facial features much. I wouldn't recommend using thick lines for the faces, it might end up looking really weird. And as a finish, I enhance his hair with black blocks, which go together really well with those thick lines. I also erased some lines into them to show that it's really hair. I wanted to go a bit sketchy on the sixth one. I pretty much scribbled those flat lines with size 20 brush. I wanted them to be quite messy. I chose to cross-hatch the parts I usually fill in with black with this line art. I cross-hatch in one direction, then the opposite one, and then I add a bit more cross-hatching where I feel it should be dark, in this case close to his cheek. To enhance the hair, I used a lot of long, thin, straight lines this time, and for the eyes behind the hair, I chose to leave them without any scribbles inside, just the outline. For the seventh one, I chose to go rather simply again and made a black outline around him, as well as added some black shades into his eyes and under his bang. Very simple but very efficient. I added some thicker black lines into his hair as a finish. For the eighth one, I went thinner again. I went in with a brush size size 8, but I've made both thick and thin lines with it. I use thick lines especially around the sharp edges of his hair, but this time the pointy ends too. I also made his eyelashes as just an outline, and the parts behind his hair I put at 50% opacity. For the parts I usually color black, I just had some straight vertical lines into it. For the hair enhancement, I used a lot of thin, short black lines this time. And the last one, number 9. I went a bit experimental this time. I've colored all the parts with my brush, meaning there would be white spots in the black, making it look like it was colored with a real-life marker. I did the same with the eyes and some line art enhancements. I cross-hatched the eyes a little bit to give them more of a volume, and the parts behind the hair I just cross-hatched less. And for the hair enhancement, I just made these weird mushroom shapes, which I realized were a bit too thick, so I just thinned them with a selection tool and added some lines into them. And here you go, 9 line art styles, quick and easy. Feel free to pick any of these that you'd like to try or draw with it as your own, because the line art isn't just lines, especially in manga. You can also combine them however you'd like, of course. Hope you liked this and hope I helped you. See ya!